Hi guys, it's Hannah from Giggly Squad. With summer around the corner, I wanted to tell you guys how I'm staying comfy and stylish. Lululemon is my secret weapon. There are plenty of copycats out there, but nothing compares to the Lululemon fabrics and fit. I've literally had my pair of Lululemon leggings since college. And I'm out of college. I know I don't look it, but I am. The quality is next level. I especially love the Lululemon Align collection. It's made with this weightless, buttery soft Nulu fabric that feels like next to nothing. It's so soft. Whether you're in Align pants, shorts, a bra, tank, skirt, a dress, you get non-stop flexibility in every direction so you can stretch the summer limits. Align even wicks sweat. And as a sweaty girl, I love this. You know it's going to be my best friend when I play tennis this summer. Shop the Align collection online at lululemon.com or your nearest Lululemon store.
BetterHelp Online Therapy bought this 30-second ad to remind you right now, wherever you are, to unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders, take a deep breath in and out. Feels better, right? That's 15 seconds of self-care. Imagine what you could do with more. Visit betterhelp.com/randompodcast for 10% off your first month of therapy. No pressure, just help. But for now, just relax.
Worried about what ingredients are hiding in your groceries? Let us take the guesswork out. We're Thrive Market, the online grocery store with the highest quality standards in the industry. We restrict 1,000 plus ingredients, so you can trust that you'll only find the best high-quality, organic, and sustainable brands, all free of the junk. With savings up to 30% off and fast carbon-neutral shipping, you get top trusted groceries at your door, and you can stop worrying about what your kids get their hands on. Start shopping at thrivemarket.com/podcast for 30% off your first order and a free gift.
Super real.
Hey guys, before we dig into this week's episode, I want to talk about something. Subscriptions. Okay, so we didn't used to have them, and now we do, which is why a lot of our older episodes from around October last year and onwards, they're now locked. If you've seen the little padlocks, that's what's going on. It's all to do with subscriptions. And some of you are understandably not happy about it. And I know that because I've seen your comments and I've seen your reviews. So for example, I'll just read two out. Somebody recently wrote on one of our episodes, "Boo, unlock the old episodes. We already have to pay a subscription to Spotify. What is this?" Someone else wrote, "No old episodes? That makes me sad. I can't afford your service. Content that was once free now costs. Make it make sense." These are reasonable concerns, so I'm here to make it make sense. So I run a business with my business partner. It's called Super Real, and we're a startup. And I run it full-time with my producer and my friend, Rachel Tuffery. And she actually works a full-time job still because podcasting economics, well, they're not great. So full transparency here. Ads cover about 2/3 of what we need just to keep things running. But generally speaking, Rachel and I, we edit the show ourselves, find all of the guests, send out all the emails, and then I do the interview, and then we get it professionally mixed. So that's some of our costs. And what I'm suggesting here is that we're not like making a Mr. Beast size income here. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a sob story because we absolutely love making this show. But we think, honestly, the show could be better. I think right now we feature whatever guest replies to my emails first, but I would love to have the resources to respond to news events or to chase really big stories properly. And I find that frustrating. So, for example, when something breaks, like recently, the guy who assassinated the CEO of United Healthcare. When that happened, I was like, let's get this story. Let's find someone who went to college with Luigi, or let's like find one of his ex-girlfriends or something. And I jumped in and I spent ages emailing all these people, but no one responded. Not a single person responded. So not only did we not get a newsy story out of that, but also like we were just suddenly under the pump because we had to scramble and find a story for that week. And what I'm saying is that if we had the resources, like we could put a whole team on it. You know, we could find that story. We could be part of the news cycle, but in a really intimate, unique way. Like we could be talking to the people who know the people that the headlines are all about. And that's the dream. That's the show that I want this to be. And that's why all of this it's a long lead up to explain why we've added subscriptions. And really, truly, honestly, it's not about squeezing you. We love you. It's just about building the kind of show that we want to make. And I think it's about building the kind of show that you want to listen to. And yes, just to address that little elephant in the room from earlier, I know you pay for Spotify, but that money doesn't come to us. It goes to the platform. We don't see a cent of that. They host our content, but they don't fund it. And that is the why. Thanks for listening to my 5-minute explanation. And hey, if you want to subscribe, thank you. Just hit subscribe on Apple or on Spotify. Follow the steps. Okay, let's get into today's episode.
Malcolm had spotted the police, and so he went back to his little base camp. He knew that they were coming, and they gave him time to get his rifle loaded, and he watched the tactical guys come into the campsite, and he basically sat there and lined him up and shot him from the campsite. I want to call it luck, but at the time that Malcolm fired at him, he actually moved. So as he's moved, he's been struck through the top of his shoulder by a .22 round. And as soon as the shot rang out, they all dropped to the ground. He basically grabbed what he could and took off. That's when everything changed.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. Okay, so I was just talking about how I'd love this show to be a little more timely, a bit more newsy. But having said that, I must confess, this episode is not that. This isn't a current event. It's not a trending topic. But maybe it is timely for me, personally. Because I'm always daydreaming about escaping. I'm always fantasizing about getting off my phone, leaving social media behind. And the image that comes to my mind in these daydreams, it's always the same. And it's a bit ridiculous, honestly. It's kind of me in the wilderness, Huckleberry Finn style, just camping, living simply. So it's this fantasy that I think powers a few of my niche interests, which includes this story here. The question is, what's it like to just live in the forest? That brings us to the story of Malcolm Naden. If that name rings a bell, it's because Naden was once one of the most wanted men in Australia. Between 2005 and 2012, that's right, 7 years, he evaded police while living deep in the New South Wales bush. He was a suspect in the disappearance and murder of 2 young women. And when suspicion turned on him, he vanished. He packed up, he went bush, and he stayed hidden for 7 years. And today I'm speaking with former Detective Inspector Ricky Hennessy, the man who eventually tracked down Naden and arrested him. And it really wasn't easy. At one point, they were searching an area of bushland the size of a small European country. And Naden was really skilled at disappearing. He didn't use his phone, he didn't use credit cards, he didn't make any of the usual mistakes, and that made him very hard to find. So we're going to talk about the investigation and the psychology behind someone who can live like that. And ultimately, we're going to explore why he did what he did. Why does someone kill 2 young women on the cusp of their lives? All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Ricky Hennessy. Hey, Ricky, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Julian.
Pleasure's all mine. Let's start with a bit of background on you. When you're a kid, did you always want to get into the police force?
From a pretty early age, I remember writing stories about serial killers when I was in, I think, 2nd class, and grew up watching documentaries and had a real interest in how the police catch criminals. So yeah, it was definitely an interest from very early on.
Okay. So what appealed to you? What did you find intriguing about the psychology of serial homicide, even at a young age?
there were two factors to me. I think initially being interested in science and forensic science, the interest in criminal investigation was like catching people who committed serious violent crime, and I was very interested in how they did it, the processes to criminal investigation. But I was also always fascinated by why people kill, and that for me ended up being a much bigger question and a much bigger interest, and what got me interested in homicide specifically and kept me there for quite some time.
Okay. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. Do you remember the moment? Do you remember what you were doing when you first heard the name Malcolm Naden?
Yeah, I think I just joined the robbery squad. This is going to sound a little off, perhaps, but I remember seeing the manhunt for him at the Dubbo Zoo on the news, and that was the first time I knew of this fellow out there in Dubbo who was wanted by the police. Didn't know too much about the background at all, but I just remember thinking, I'm glad I'm not those cops, because that sounds like a shoot fight.
Seriously.
So yeah, maybe it was a bit of karma coming back to bite me later on for thinking that. But
right.
Yeah, it was like that was the first time I had any knowledge of it whatsoever. That would have been probably the end of 2005.
Okay. Well, can you give me a little bit of detail just on the case at that time? So Malcolm was wanted over the murder of two young women in Dubbo, and then he kind of just started sleeping out at the zoo, eating fruit out of the bins and stuff like that. This is my understanding. Is that about right?
Yeah. So Letitia Nolan, his cousin, disappeared in January 2005. She was last seen around the family home in Dubbo, and the police did quite a thorough investigation and response into that, but didn't really have any viable leads. And then 6 months later, Christy Scholes, another family member of Malcolm Naden, was found dead in Malcolm's bedroom. And it was pretty quickly determined that she'd been strangled to death. And there was a question mark around whether or not she'd been interfered with sexually or not at that time. So Malcolm went on the run from that point. Speaking to him later on, he said he knew he was gone. He had to go on the run. There was no way in the world he was going to get away with a second murder. So he took off and was living around Dubbo, like on the outskirts of Dubbo. He had a little dugout, a little hide not far from the golf course originally that he was living in. And we suspect that the family of Malcolm was still providing with some sort of supplies or sustenance. But apart from that, he was living primarily just by scavenging. And he did that for a while until he moved into the Dubbo Zoo.
Moving to the Dubbo Zoo is a pretty rash decision, I reckon. What do you know what that was about?
I have some thoughts. I think that type of lifestyle was always appealing to Malcolm. Even when the original investigators did a lot of work around profiling Malcolm when he went on the run. Initially, they spoke to all of his family members at length and took detailed statements, and it really painted this picture to me of this fellow who, although he lived in his family home surrounded by a lot of family, he didn't want to be a part of it. He would isolate himself more often than not in his room and only come out to eat. But then there'd be other periods where he'd try and sort of involve himself back in society to the extent where he'd want to go out and get an education and do certain things. But ultimately, like living away from people in the zoo, where no one knew of him or where he was, I think that's how I ultimately ended up spending the next 7 years. And I think it suited him down to the ground. It sounds strange to us, but I don't think it was really that strange to him.
Okay.
And there was plenty of food around in the zoo for him to support himself he moved into one of the residences that are used by the staff and was living in the roof for a while. I can't recall off the top of my head how long he said he lived in the roof, but he was able to come down, help himself to some food, clean up, do whatever he needed to, and then go back up into the roof. And he lived undetected like that for a while.
I mean, it sounds like a bad life to me, living in a roof, eating banana scraps. So Dubbo's not a big place. Why was he so hard to find? Can you just give me just a couple of dot points on the challenges of a manhunt like this?
Police use methods. There's almost like a formula or routine to finding people, and it relies a lot on humans being pretty normal, like living a mainstream sort of life, an attachment to technology. There are ways that police find people, and I think one thing I realized out of this was you can sort of get complacent, like you rely on that to track people down. And with Malcolm, none of that applied. He didn't use a phone. He wasn't on the grid. He wasn't interacting with anyone. No one could see him. Like everything that cops would rely on to find someone just didn't apply to Malcolm. So even to the point where he would disguise, or he'd go to a lot of effort to hide the fact that he had been anywhere. He wouldn't leave a trail. And he did that for many years later on the run in the bush as well. But it's a lot harder to catch someone who's just doing their best to stay off the radar as much as possible than people probably imagine.
Yeah, I can see that. There's just a few things that really step outside the formula, as you say.
Yeah, well, he was underestimated a lot. Like I have to admit, I underestimated him almost right up to the end. It's just people just don't think someone would put themselves out like that and live so rough. It's still like hard to believe looking back on it and talking about it. The way that he did live, no one expected someone to survive like that for so long. So it was almost discounted by a lot of people.
Would you say that he was smart?
I'd say he was reasonably intelligent, yeah. Yeah, I got the impression when I was speaking, he's very well spoken, although quietly spoken. And I think he could have gone on to do a lot of things if he wanted to. But he suffered from mental illness and some personality disorders. I think it really, really impacted his life.
Okay, so at what point did you come to the case? What was happening?
I came to the case, it would have been around the end of 2010, I think.
Okay.
So it was my first year at the homicide squad. Initially, it was just when I was put in charge of the investigation, just spent a lot of time trying to catch up on. By then, it would have been 5 years of background investigation, records and handovers from staff who'd been involved in the investigation and the manhunt for all of that time.
Okay. So I guess, 5 years in, he's New South Wales' most wanted man. And when you got involved, did you find a team that had been working on it for a long time who were feeling a bit jaded or a little bit cynical about your chances of finding him? Or like sort of what was the mood within the homicide squad at that time?
Well, by that time, the strike force for Strike Force Durkin, as it was called, was basically one guy,
right?
Who was involved from the start in the investigation. And frankly, I felt sorry for him. I remember watching this poor guy staring at maps on a computer screen of all of these rural areas, and I remember seeing some of the terrain and going like, "Good luck, mate." Like,
yeah.
That fellow had to leave the homicide squad, and I would, he handed over to me. I remember my initial thought was like, "Oh, I'm never going to catch this guy. There's no way in the world. Like, what am I going to do?"
Yeah.
I'm looking at all these maps and these things, and like, I think the last time I'd been camping was at school. I couldn't read a topographical map, but using a compass, like I wouldn't know. I honestly didn't know where to start. But one thing that did strike me was that there was a common theme in the operations that they were trying to go out and catch him. And it just didn't make sense to me that you would think that a team of cops could go run out into the bush and actually just catch this guy like it's a game of hide and go seek. Like it's not, to me, just didn't seem feasible. So I thought ultimately an operation that would be successful in catching him was one that lured him to the police, where he was basically surrounded and captured.
Okay. And Malcolm at this time, he was living like a hermit out in the bush and stealing food from houses, from farms and sort of gorging himself. Yeah, just fill in the gaps there.
So the original investigators had worked out that he stuck roughly along the Bicentennial Trail of New South Wales, which goes, all the way down the New South Wales, almost to the from the Queensland border down. And he would move roughly seasonally. So, trying to stay a little bit warmer. He'd move, up or down depending on the temperatures, basically. But his favourite area was around the Barrington Tops area, the Barrington Tops National Park. And I can see why. It's stunning countryside. It's absolutely beautiful, but it gets very cold. It's very, very cold most of the year. But in the first few years, he was meticulous in trying to stay undetected. He was really impressive. He would break into these rural huts or houses that are in the middle of nowhere. Most of them are not even on don't have power. And he would disguise his entry and exit. He would only steal as much food as he absolutely needed. So if there was, if there's 4 cans of baked beans on someone's shelf, he'd take the one from the back and only one. He'd take a little bit of meat or whatever else. So people would come in and they'd be like, I swear I had 4 cans of baked beans, but
yeah.
So for years and years, people didn't realise he was even around.
Hey, we're just going to stop here for a quick ad break, but stick around. We'll be right back with more What It Was Like.
Hi guys, it's Hannah from Giggly Squad. With summer around the corner, I wanted to tell you guys how I'm staying comfy and stylish. Lululemon is my secret weapon. There are plenty of copycats out there, but nothing compares to the Lululemon fabrics and fit. I've literally had my pair of Lululemon leggings since college. And I'm out of college. I know I don't look it, but I am. The quality is next level. I especially love the Lululemon Align collection. It's made with this weightless, buttery soft Nulu fabric that feels like next to nothing. It's so soft. Whether you're in Align pants, shorts, a bra, tank, skirt, a dress, you get nonstop flexibility in every direction so you can stretch the summer limits. Align even wicks sweat. And as a sweaty girl, I love this. You know it's going to be my best friend when I play tennis this summer. Shop the Align collection online at lululemon.com or your nearest Lululemon store.
I have this nightmare that I never finish college or that someone's going to find out that I don't have the qualifications for this job and I'm like a total fraud.
Sometimes even the most successful people experience imposter syndrome. Check out Mind If We Talk, the newest podcast helping you with tough topics. In this episode, licensed therapist Hesu Jo sits down with award-winning journalist Jane Marie to explore why so many of us have imposter syndrome and why success never seems to solve it. Whether you've ever questioned your own success or felt like the odd one out, this episode's for you. Listen and subscribe to Mind If We Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, who here loves when their nails are perfectly done? Me. I'm Sarah Gibson Tuttle, and I started Olive in June because, let's be real, we all deserve to have gorgeous nails, but who wants to spend a fortune or half their day at the salon? And that's why I created the Mani System, so you can have that salon-perfect manicure right at home. And guess what? The best part? Each mani only costs $2. Yep, you heard me, $2. No more $30, $40, $50 salon trips that eat up your day. Now you can paint your nails whenever you want, wherever you want. And trust me, you're going to be obsessed with your nails and everyone is going to ask you, where did you get your nails done? And here's a little something extra. Head over to oliveinjune.com and get 20% off your first Mani System with code PERFECTMANI20 at oliveinjune.com/PERFECTMANI20. That's code PERFECTMANI20 for 20% 10% off at oliveandjune.com/perfectmanny20. You're all set for a nail glow up. Let's get those nails looking fabulous, shall we?
Worried about what ingredients are hiding in your groceries? Let us take the guesswork out. We're Thrive Market, the online grocery store with the highest quality standards in the industry. We restrict 1,000 plus ingredients, so you can trust that you'll only find the best high quality, organic, and sustainable brands, all free of the junk. With savings up to 30% off and fast carbon neutral shipping, you get top trusted groceries at your door, and you can stop worrying about what your kids get their hands on. Start shopping at thrivemarket.com/podcast for 30% off your first order and a free gift.
The police had no idea where he was until someone finally called the police when they were convinced that they had a break and enter on their rural property, and the police found his fingerprints on a I think it was a windowsill from memory. But this is years after Dubbo Zoo. I think it was 2007, 2008, where the forensic evidence started to turn up on some of these places, and police realised he was still alive and still active, and obviously keeping a very low profile.
To me, it's amazing that he was still in New South Wales. I would have thought just go to Perth. I don't know how connected sort of interstate police forces are these days, but it feels to me like the person working that case is most likely to be in New South Wales, and to sort of hang around not too far from Sydney. Maybe that was an oversight.
Yeah, absolutely. But he didn't think that big, frankly. And I don't mean that as a criticism, but he, at least according to Malcolm, he deliberately chose this lifestyle to partly suffer, but partly also to focus himself on survival. And according to him, part of the motivation of that was to stop himself from killing again. He was concerned that he would do it again. And so he found the need to constantly focus on where your next meal is coming from and where you're going to put your shelter. He found that helpful.
That is interesting. So you're suggesting that for him it was this sort of sexual compulsion to kill, and he was actively trying to not do that.
Malcolm never admitted to being sexually motivated. That's my opinion.
Okay.
He was quite coy about the sexual aspects of his crimes. But in terms of the killing, he said, it's like knocking down a brick wall. Once you knock it down, it's gone. You can't stop. Like, you can't just put the ball back together again. But they were the words he used to describe, how he looked at it.
Okay. And what led you to believe that it was sexual if he didn't admit that it was?
We had evidence that Letitia Nolan, when she was abducted, there was a sighting of her car in an area that was frequented for kids or whoever who want to go and park and play around in cars.
Sure.
And Malcolm didn't notice, but there were kids that went down there probably for that very reason, who sighted Letitia Nolan's car with the windows all fogged up. And Malcolm admitted to being in that area initially, but then moving on to where he finally disposed of her remains. So based on that, and then his admission that he did sexually assault Christy after he killed her, that there was definitely a sexual motive. That he was motivated, by sexual interests rather than just a desire to kill. But he had also been accused of the indecent assault of a 12-year-old girl prior to all this as well. So,
right. Okay.
Putting all that together, it was certainly my opinion that he was motivated by his sexual interests. The other thing, which we only found out later during the manhunt, was his interest in incest. So he, when he broke into a particular property, we had a look at the search history on the computer that he accessed, and I think virtually all of the searches were incest-related searches. Like, he'd specifically gone in looking for that pornography.
Wow, that is a creepy little detail.
Yeah. And as I said, the original investigators did a terrific job of the profiling of Malcolm, immediately after he went on the run. And he had made repeated sexual advances to members of his own family through writing letters and very awkward sort of advances. But another aspect too, which I've forgotten to mention, was that the police also found holes that were small holes drilled in the roof and the walls of the family home back in Dubbo, that they believe he'd used to spy on his family members while they were either in the shower or, in another room.
Oh man, that's twisted. Do we know anything about his background? I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that when we sort of look at someone's background, we find examples where they've fallen victim to other sexual predators, or they've sort of been groomed, or was he someone who just sort of trained himself in this kind of thinking independently?
The investigators were quite successful in getting the immediate family members to talk about his activities sort of around the home. But there was a reluctance to speak in any great detail. And so we never really found out a lot about his early years. So we don't know if there's a history of trauma there. As you rightly pointed out, it's quite often the case. But yeah, they're not, certainly not enough is known for me to make comment on that.
Okay, all right. So you got to say this case, he's out in the bush. You're not an outdoors man, but now you need to find this needle in a haystack. So what do you start doing?
I knew a fellow who was working at Tamworth Detectives. Very good fellow, very thorough, and very interested in Malcolm and the manhunt. And he called me. I think I was down in Goulburn. And he said, "We think Malcolm's just broken into these two places at Naden. And we wanted to put some surveillance. He was basically asking for permission to put some surveillance around those properties in the event that Malcolm came back. And I said, yeah, of course, but do what you got to do. And so he did that. And as you've said before, he had fallen into the habit of returning to properties where he had a successful haul. We learnt later that he would set up a camp in an area, sort of, a little base camp. And from there, he'd go out and hit these properties, and anyone, that he was happy with, either food or clothing or whatever he needed to survive. He'd hang around and he'd wait for the owner to come back, restock, resupply, and then go back and hit it again. And then I got a call from this fellow again. It wasn't long after the original break-in enters, and he said he's come back. A couple of guys from the homicide squad, myself, Paul, and the tactical operations unit, were up there the next day in Naden.
Okay, do you want to walk me through it? Let's take it slow. What happened?
Well, the surveillance that we had was very limited. It only gave us an idea of where he might have gone. And for the first couple of days, it just felt like a needle in a haystack. The Naden area is pretty remote, and the bush is thick. The tactical guys are trying to go through this bushland with, there's no fire trails, no footpaths. It's not like a bushwalking event. They're literally cutting their way through the terrain to get anywhere. And so it was really hard going for them. And I could just see the morale dropping, as the hours went by, over the next couple of days. But little did they know, Malcolm had spotted the police. So he saw them in a car going down a trail on the way. It was actually on the way back to the command post because we'd finished up that day. And he said he remembered seeing them, and he knew straight away that they're the police and they're here for me. And so he went back to his little base camp, which is probably only a few hundred meters from where he saw the police. And unfortunately, it probably made him all the more alert the next morning. So the tactical guys went back to that same spot and started the search from there on the morning of the 7th of December, I think it was. And he heard them coming from a mile away. He said he knew that they were there. He knew that they were coming, and they gave him time to get his rifle loaded. And he watched the tactical guys come into the campsite. He saw the dog handler with the dog, and that really concerned him. He said he was terrified of the dog and what the dog could do. But he ended up choosing another officer who he thought was a bigger threat. And he basically sat there and lined him up and shot him from the campsite. Just as the police realised, the tactical guys had just realised that, we're here, we've just found a campsite, just as they're sort of like, this is it, we've got a campsite in front of us. It was like bang, and they're getting shot at.
So what happened to the guy who was shot at?
Well, I don't want to call it luck, but at the time that Malcolm fired at him, he actually moved to turn around to communicate to the other officers and say, like, that's the campsite. So as he's moved, he struck through the top of his shoulder by a .22 round, and that round was actually caught in the back of his vest. And as soon as the shot rang out, they all dropped to the ground and did what they could to try and protect themselves. Unfortunately, although they'd seen the campsite and they'd heard the shot, they had absolutely no idea where he was at that exact point in time. So they didn't know if they were getting shot at from behind, didn't know if they were getting shot at from the campsite. It was terrifying.
Yeah, scary.
To be, so vulnerable. And fortunately, that was the right call. For them hitting the ground was the right thing to do, whether they, realised it or not, because Malcolm said if it had turned into a gunfight, he would have sat there and returned fire. But the fact that they dropped to the ground and, there's nothing more he could do, he basically grabbed what he could and took off.
Did they hear him legging it?
No.
So they were left just laying there on the ground for, what, hours?
Well, the officer who was shot was tended to by the other officers in the team. We had communications at the command post that the shots had been fired. So from that point on, it was basically getting the other teams, the support teams, in there to extract them as safely as possible. It felt like a very, very long time, those couple of hours to get them in and get them back.
Yeah, I can imagine. So when you got them back, how did you feel about the status of the case at that point?
Yeah, frankly, it was, I just felt so much for the officers that were involved. One of them I'd known since the academy. Yeah. And it was, really hard to see them affected and see the officer that was shot, although he was, making jokes and making light of it at the time while the Ambos are doing their thing. But he, it was really hard. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm guessing you guys kind of regrouped, and then what did you do?
That's when everything changed. This was front page news. The commissioner was involved and making decisions. So we went from basically doing our best to trying to cope with suddenly having all of these resources and all of this pressure, all this scrutiny, these expectations, cops being shot, what are you going to do about it? This guy's on the run, he's been on the run for how long now? Like, you got to be joking. Like, what are you blokes doing? So, that was the sense. I was just pretty much felt at a complete loss, like at that point. Yeah. Because I knew despite having hundreds and hundreds of police and whatever else, we were still faced with a guy who could hide, right in front of you. And so out of sheer frustration, I started Googling things that would work in this environment. And lo and behold, there were these types of devices that talk to satellites that can operate off batteries. And so myself and another fellow, really pushed the idea of trying to use these devices, adapt these devices as surveillance in these types of areas.
These things like motion detectors for deer hunting and that sort of thing?
No. I'm just mindful of giving away too much methodology.
Yeah, you don't want to give away the trade secrets, but
yeah.
Okay.
We came up with a workaround that we thought may work to start putting some sort of surveillance around the places that we knew Malcolm would go to.
Okay, and these are his favorite places to get a meal, to restock.
Yeah.
Hey, we're just going to stop here for a quick ad break, but stick around. We'll be right back with more What It Was Like.
Hey, this is Jonathan Fields, host of the Good Life Project podcast. Boost Mobile reminds me of what I love, when someone reimagines what's possible. They have invested billions in building America's newest 5G network, becoming the country's fourth major carrier. They are doing things differently, offering a $25 monthly unlimited plan that never increases in price and letting you try their service risk-free for 30 days. With blazing fast 5G and plans for all the latest devices, they're changing the game. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com. The Boost Mobile network, together with their roaming partners, covers 99% of the U.S. population. 5G speeds not available in all areas.
Hi guys, it's Hannah from Giggly Squad. With summer around the corner, I wanted to tell you guys how I'm staying comfy and stylish. Lululemon is my secret weapon. There are plenty of copycats out there, but nothing compares to the Lululemon fabrics and fit. I've literally had my pair of Lululemon leggings since college. And I'm out of college. I know I don't look it, but I am. The quality is next level. I especially love the Lululemon Align collection. It's made with this weightless, buttery soft Nulu fabric that feels like next to nothing. It's so soft. Whether you're in Align pants, shorts, a bra, tank, skirt, a dress, you get nonstop flexibility in every direction so you can stretch the summer limits. Align even wicks sweat. And as a sweaty girl, I love this. You know it's going to be my best friend when I play tennis this summer. Shop the Align collection online at lululemon.com or your nearest Lululemon store.
So, what happened next?
Malcolm became very reckless. He thought his days were numbered. He thought after shooting the police officer that he would basically be hunted down and killed by the police. And so rather than trying to sort of hide his trail or move about in his usual way, like just sort of slowly and calmly, he covered a lot of ground. And when he was breaking into places, he was very obvious. We obviously knew it was him each time. But the other support that we got for this manhunt was a lot of intelligence support. So with the benefit of the intelligence analysts that were brought up on site, we were able to have a list of all the places that he'd been to, and we mapped those out. It was basically just a constant game of trying to get in front of him, getting coverage in the right area, so that when he did go into one of those places, we would immediately respond and we would catch him inside.
Okay. So you're kind of just bugging all these houses, hoping that he's going to just blunder into one of them.
In a manner of speaking.
Yeah, my words, not yours. Okay, all right. So tell me about how you finally got him.
It was about 8 o'clock on I think it was the 21st of March. I got a message to say that one of the places that he had just hit not long ago, that our surveillance had been triggered around that property, and I knew the owner, and I called the owner, and he said, "It's not me. I'm not there." And so by the time the tactical guys were rolling out to that property, I was already starting to feel that, like, this is it. We're going to have a chance here. But yeah, it was a long wait. Okay.
So were you back in sort of HQ in Sydney and the tactical team were out there?
We were at the command post at Gloucester.
Okay.
Gloucester was basically home for 6 months for us.
Yeah.
While we did this, myself, other homicide and other criminal investigators, the tactical guys, all the support teams, logistics, like it was a big thing.
So as the tactical team closed in, what did they see?
They saw that he'd lit a fire. So the first thing that I remember them reporting was that there was a fire going in the place. Probably they thought the fireplace or something, like he set up to cook. And then it described a couple of movements. They saw someone coming in and out of one of the doors, and just sort of some general like movement. I don't remember them being confident, like 100%, that it was Malcolm at that point. But there was clearly someone there who shouldn't be there. But after that long and so many false alarms and so many operations, so many places that we'd gone out and surrounded only to find that they were empty, I doubt if I was alone anyway, and sort of not wanting to hope too much that this is finally it. Unfortunately, somehow, Malcolm detected the police, and mind you, this is the middle of the night, complete pitch darkness. He still managed to see something that spooked him. He went running back through the house, out another door to try and get away, but he'd already been surrounded by that point. So once the tactical team realised he was about to try and run, they initiated the response to arrest him.
Okay. Is that just as simple as like just chasing him down in the dark and, spear tackling him?
That's almost what it boiled down to, yeah. I mean, it was, as I said, it didn't go exactly according to plan, because he basically ran into the police, which is always what I would have hoped for. Fortunately, he ran straight past a very high-powered, loaded rifle that he'd stolen not long ago from another property. So he didn't have a chance to sort of turn it into a shootout.
Yeah.
He basically just panicked and ran. And there were tactical police and one with a general purpose dog who's, trained to bring fleeing offenders down. And they, just said, basically tackle him to the ground, and that was it.
Okay. So did you make the arrest personally?
Yeah, so we got the radio call that there was someone in custody, and I'll never forget the call was, he's just confirmed, his name's Malcolm Naden. And everyone at command post just looked around and went like, wow, this is it, like that's it, finally.
Did you sort of erupt into applause, or like what was that feeling? I
think most people were feeling what I was, almost like a sense of disbelief, like shock. Like it'd been, at least for me, like it had been my whole life for months and months, every day waking up, what am I doing today? I'm trying to catch Malcolm Naden. There wasn't anything else. And so for it to finally not just happen, but happen the way that we had always hoped it would go down. It was almost like clockwork, in the end. It was really impressive to me, at least, to see the tactical guys do their thing so well. I was just part disbelief, but also just this flood of relief for me, like all that pressure, finally, that's over.
So when you arrived at the property, what did you find?
When we got there, Naden was seated on the ground. He was cable tied. And I just remember the filth, like he was absolutely covered head to toe in dirt and grime. Not, just from the arrest, but clearly that's just the way he'd been living. And I was struck immediately by how gaunt he was. Like, he was emaciated. There's barely anything of him. With his long, straggly beard. He looked terrible. I guess that made it all the more surprising when Paul and I went up to talk to him, and he spoke so normally. No, it's not a descriptive word normally, but I was just struck by how well and calm he spoke. He started engaging with us straight away in just sort of the small talk. So as I'm having this conversation with him, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is the guy who hasn't had a conversation with a human being possibly for nearly 7 years. This is someone who the psychologist said may not ever speak again. He may have lost either the ability or the inclination to speak, let alone engage with police. On top of that, he'd just been arrested by the tactical police, which is never fun. And here he was sitting in the mud, talking about football and trying to dodge snakes while he's, on the run. And it was a little bit surreal.
Yeah, it sounds surreal. And I understand that he said, "Oh, thank God," when he was finally taken down, as though it was all a relief.
Yeah, the tactical guys spoke to him a bit before we got out there, and one of the things that he said almost immediately was, "Thank God it's over." And he went into a lot more detail about that with me later when we got a chance to speak at length, and he said he thought he was going to die. He didn't think he had long left in him surviving like that. He thought he would just basically perish out there. It was really getting to him, and it made sense to me. I could certainly accept that because, as I said, he'd become so complacent and so reckless. He'd gone from this guy who was meticulously breaking into places to leave absolutely no sign that he'd been there, even though these places weren't really frequented, to going in, kicking doors down, ransacking places, throwing food around, slashing things, looking at computers, drinking all their beer, vomiting on the floor. It was, you could sort of see that, looking back at his behavior, that it was sort of someone who probably given up a bit.
Yeah.
Couldn't really care as much. So I definitely accepted that. And I ended up going on to accept just about everything that Malcolm said to me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he was a loner, and he sort of embraced this life in the wilderness. But at the same time, 7 years completely alone, just isolated from civilization. That'd really weigh you down. You'd get sick of it.
Yeah, even if you are a loner by nature, and any other sort of factors on top of that, humans just aren't built for that isolation at all.
Yeah.
Not for that long.
Yeah. Okay, so he was, he was charged and he was convicted. And what happened to him?
After he was arrested, he was placed in Supermax. And that was where Paul and I had our conversations with him. We did interview him at Taree Police Station the night that he was arrested. And he was relatively forthcoming about some of his behaviour. He was happy to talk about how he lived life on the run, and he admitted that he'd been, breaking into places and stealing things, but he didn't want to talk about shooting the police officer. He didn't want to talk about the homicides. And he definitely didn't want to talk about the indecent assault that he'd been accused of. And so that was quite tricky. We had to really be patient with him and develop that relationship with him to make him comfortable to want to talk about those offences and those events. And as you can imagine, people don't confess often as it is, but they certainly don't confess to crimes of that nature.
Yeah.
Unless they think that there's some sort of bragging rights or some other sort of factor at play. And there was none of that with Malcolm. We did try one of the tactics that one of the psychologists had suggested, and that was to sort of praise him and play up to his ability to survive on the run and become sort of this romantic, fugitive Ned Kelly type figure that the media had quite helped him. But there's one of the few times where his voice changed and he just had such disdain in his voice. He's like, anyone who thinks well of me because of that's a fool. He didn't want to buy into the ego part at all. He shot that down straight away.
That's unique, I think, that ego is such a small component of his motivation here.
Yeah, as he said, his motivation in living the way he did was sort of described as a distraction from wanting to offend again. And no doubt there were other things to it as well. Like, as I said, he did have mental health issues, and he did have personality issues that would have contributed to that. But I did find it interesting too, the lack of ego.
So I understand that eventually he wrote you a letter. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we prompted that because when I read all the material that the original investigators had put together, I worked out that he was quite happy to communicate in writing. Like I said, there were these awkward advances to people in the house, and he started to resort to leaving letters. So it became clear to me that, when he wasn't comfortable to talk face to face with someone, he was comfortable to talk about things in written communication. So that was the strategy. We thought, well, let's encourage him to write. If he's not comfortable to talk about these things, and we understand why, perhaps he would be happy to write them. So I provided him with things that we wanted to know, that we did want to talk to him about, and he took those things away, and he ended up writing a 25-page letter.
Wow.
In response, along with specific answers to some of the things that we prompted him on. And the 25-page letter was graphic. It graphically detailed the murder of Letitia and Christy.
Why do you think it was graphic? What was he trying to prove with that?
He was definitely trying to shock.
Yeah.
You can't read the letters and not think that. Like, it was designed to shock the reader. Why? I don't know. In speaking to him later in other conversations, he was sort of testing us, I think. And certainly at one point he admitted to testing me when he started talking about the murder of Letitia. We were up there trying to locate her remains in Dubbo at the time when he spoke to me, and I can't repeat what he said, but it was obviously designed to try and shock me. And I just remember the look in his eye, like when he turned around and looked at me, and I was like, That's what evil looks like. That's why people, when they see killers or they see people, there's this sense of evil or some other, something else at play within a hero. The way he deliberately turned to me with that look in his eye, as he said it, I'll never forget that.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, you say that there wasn't much ego associated with his skills as a survivalist out in the bush, but it sounds to me like there's some sense of pride about his crimes as almost like a sort of twisted career. Like it's, I mean, I don't know, I'm reading into this, but it sounds to me that he's sort of like sees himself as this sort of evil character, and he's somewhat proud of that. He's like, look, what I can, can you face the kind of darkness that I've seen? Like, it sounds like there's some sort of bragging there a little bit.
If you read the letter in isolation, you would absolutely, I think, and just about anyone would reach that conclusion. It does sound like he's bragging, like he's trying to shock, he's trying to brag. But in every other aspect, in all the other conversations, there just wasn't a feature for him. I can't reconcile it myself. Like he would talk about what he had done and the type of character he was, as if he was repulsed by it. In other conversations, like he knew what he did was wrong. He knew he was a monster. Like that wasn't lost on him. But yeah, then you've got these letters where there's definitely that, hey, look at me, this is what I've done. This is how bad I can be. There's certainly, that was in the letters. So yeah, as I said, I can't reconcile it. I'm not a psychologist, but yeah, it's makes it a little more complex.
Do you think that Malcolm Naden is evil?
For the most part, no, I don't. And I guess this goes right back to where we started with the conversation, why do people do what they do? You would have seen Malcolm Naden on the street and not looked at him twice. You would have had a conversation with him and dismissed him. Was nobody, but for what he did. What motivated him to do it, as I said, I think it was sexually motivated, but why that then went on to be him brutally killing two of his family members is really hard for me to reconcile, having spent enough time with him to get a sense of who he would be to anyone else, like just this normal guy, this normal, unassuming guy who would try and blend in the background, but who I think did ultimately want some sort of validation and human connection. Like he at one point said to Paul, geez, I wish I met you under different circumstances. I would love to just have a beer at the pub with you. And this is in the middle of him graphically describing two murders. So yeah, it's surreal. It's hard to sort of get your head wrapped around it.
God. These characters seem to have so many inconsistencies. They're just sort of at war with their own personalities. But that's a bizarre medley of characteristics. So did you get closure for the victims' families with the sentencing of Malcolm Naden?
I don't really want to answer that for them. He's in jail for life, like life meaning life. He'll never get out. There isn't a harsher penalty available in New South Wales. So I was at least satisfied with that in terms of the outcome, like as an investigator. I think anyone who knew the circumstances of the case thought he should get life, and he did. So certainly that aspect, I think there would, for me, there was closure at least. but I was always motivated right from the time I took on that investigation in trying to find the remains of Letitia. That was a massive part of it for me to try and at least provide some element of closure to the Nolan family. And unfortunately, that was probably the most unsuccessful part of the investigation. We were never able to recover all of the remains.
So he detailed her murder, but he didn't fess up to where the body was.
No, he gave us an exact location, and
Okay.
he did everything he could to try and get us to find her remains. To the point that we had him up there on the riverbank, walking around, trying to direct us to where she was. But unfortunately, when he had committed the murder, the Dubbo area was in severe drought in early 2005. And the landscape between January 2005 and April 2012 had changed significantly, to the point where the riverbanks weren't even at the same location. There were trees that were there that weren't there. The trees had fallen down.
Right.
Even his landmarks, his recollection, his ability to navigate, all of that had changed. And so one of the complications with the latter part of the investigation was not being able to find her remains, especially after he'd gone to such lengths to describe where she was. It started to call into question whether or not his confession was even real or true. If this part isn't real, if she's not where he said she is, what else is he lying about? These are the questions that I had to ask. Ultimately, although we didn't find her remains immediately after we arrested him, but when we conducted the first search, several years later, we did another search in exactly the same location, and found some of her remains. So, I don't know how to describe this, but I think a lot of people didn't want certain details of Letitia's murder to be true because of the nature of them. But for me, unfortunately, I think that was the only piece of information that we weren't really able to verify, and that turned out to be true. So, as I said, in the end, I tended to accept just about everything that Malcolm told me. The only parts of his versions that I don't accept are around his motivations.
Right. Okay. Can I ask a personal question? And that is that after working cases like this and glimpsing this sort of aspect of humanity, how does it affect your own parenting? You got kids. Would you say that you're more cautious than you would be as a parent had you never worked in the homicide squad?
Every police officer sees horrendous things and unfortunately sees a side to humanity that we probably don't really want to, looking back on it. It's definitely made me a different parent than I would have been, absolutely, in a lot of ways, a lot of negative ways, I think. But that protective aspect, yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any advice? I mean, I got a little kid and, she's a little girl and I'm listening to this story being like, oh man, I just can't ever let her outside. But where did you land with this kind of stuff?
Depends on the day, Julian.
Yeah.
And, what things are on my mind and what things aren't. I try to balance what I see have seen with my own childhood and how I lived as a child, and I try and provide my kids with the same type of freedom I did as a kid. But yeah, I mean, it's a generation apart. I think everyone parents different now, for obvious reasons. But yeah, knowing the prevalence of offending, particularly sexual offending against children, makes me very, very cautious for my kids around anyone, literally anyone.
So for you, it's not like a social media thing. It's just around just everyone.
Pretty much, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. And I know that's, when I say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous, but yeah, I think being in the police force or a similar line of work, not just the police, it does have that effect on you, absolutely.
So would it be fair to say that working in the police force has I don't know, maybe affected your optimism for humanity?
Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, I can accept that that's not actually fair, and probably it's not a healthy or the correct way of looking at things. But unfortunately, it's the instinctive reaction most of the time.
So what do you? I mean, we're pretty much at the end here, but I just want a little snapshot of like what you're doing these days and where this case fits in the broader landscape of your career and just your life generally.
So now I'm working for the Children's Guardian in New South Wales, and it's basically child protection. So child abuse allegations, oversight of organisations with child-related employment. So for me, the motive for that is not linked to the Naden case, but definitely a lot of other cases where at the homicide squad, particularly, I had to investigate the murders of children or juveniles, and some of those deaths at least were preventable. And so that's my motivation now. In a role where I'm able to continue to do that sort of work, to work towards child protection. So I've been doing that now for about 18 months.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, we're very lucky to live in a world or live in a country where, organizations like that exist. People like you are working hard at keeping kids safe. That's positive. That is absolutely a silver lining. This has been amazing, Ricky. Thank you so much for walking me through this journey.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, it's a very interesting story. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of aspects.
Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffery. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, who also did our theme music. A big thanks to Ellie Dickey and Nina Fussell on our research team. And this whole thing has been a Super Real production.
Hi guys, it's Hannah from Giggly Squad. With summer around the corner, I wanted to tell you guys how I'm staying comfy and stylish. Lululemon is my secret weapon. There are plenty of copycats out there, but nothing compares to the Lululemon fabrics and fit. I've literally had my pair of Lululemon leggings since college. And I'm out of college. I know I don't look it, but I am. The quality is next level. I especially love the Lululemon Align collection. It's made with this weightless, buttery soft Nulu fabric that feels like next to nothing. It's so soft. Whether you're in Align pants, shorts, a bra, tank, skirt, a dress, you get nonstop flexibility in every direction so you can stretch the summer limits. Align even wicks sweat. And as a sweaty girl, I love this. You know it's going to be my best friend when I play tennis this summer. Shop the Align collection online at lululemon.com or your nearest Lululemon store.
You were made for going the extra mile for your pet, and Farrah Pets was made to do the same. Farrah Pets supplements are vet-created with innovative ingredients that combine Eastern and Western therapies so your pet can thrive. After all, you would do anything to help your pet feel their best, and so would we. Visit farrahpets.com/pod to get 20% off today. That's FERA pets.com/POD. Farrah Pets. We were made for this.